Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Hello.
We love it when we have visitors on Books at Lunchtime. Good morning, Tracy. Good morning, Hollie. We're joined by Hollie today, Hollie Hughes, who is the author of The
Girl and the Dinosaur.
Dinosaur, yeah, which is one of our favourites in the shop. And eagle-eyed viewers might have remembered that we spoke to Sarah Massini the other day, who is the illustrator, and we are so excited to be able to get the other side of the story of the creation of The Girl and the Dinosaur. So, Hollie, good morning.
Hello.
Tell us, please, about Marianne and your girl and your dinosaur.
How it all started.
How did it start? Yeah, where did it come from?
That would be great.
Okay. So I suppose for me, it started a long time ago before I even started writing picture books. When I read a book called The Dinosaur Hunters by Deborah Cadbury, and it was a brilliant book, and it was all about the kind of early dinosaur hunters. But it was all about these men and the kind of battles that they had between them in this, in the kind of search to be, in the kind of journey to be the quest, if you like, to be the most kind of esteemed early paleontologist. And but in the background there was this woman who was just quietly, digging for fossils and putting them together and writing papers that she couldn't actually present to the Royal Society because women weren't allowed to. And that woman was Mary Anning, and she just kind of, from the very first time that was the first time I'd ever actually heard of her when I read that book. So it must have been about, well over 20 years ago now. Hadn't heard anything about her all the way through school or anything, anything like that. And I was just captivated by her. So she kind of stayed with me, I suppose, throughout kind of my adult life. And then we had children, and we used to sort of take the children to Walton-on-the-Naze. We used to hunt for fossils, sharks' teeth and things like that all the time. We've been to sort of Lyme, Regis and places like that. The children were really interested. And one time we were just on the beach looking for fossils, and my son, he just kind of made up this little rhyme about hunting for fossils or hunting for bones. I think it was sort of like, I'm a fossil hunter kind of thing. And it was just one of those moments really where the two things just kind of collided in my brain, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah, this is an idea for a story. And then so the two things came together. But I didn't want to do, there's some fabulous books about Mary Anning. There's some, there's picture books. There's a really famous one by Laurence Anholt about I can't remember what it's, I can't remember the title of it now actually, but yeah, there's some really good, Stone Girl, Bone Girl, yeah. So there's some really good, there's some really brilliant books already, and I thought, I'm not going to do like a straight sort of retelling of her story. So I'd say that she inspired The Girl and the Dinosaur, but of course the story is very different.
And what was the decision to make it into a rhyming picture book format?
Well, I suppose, by that time I'd already had a few books. Well, I think I'd had two. No, I don't think I'd had anything published then actually, but I had books in progress. So I was already kind of contracted for more books. And it, and I think the two first books, I'd had two, there were two books in progress that were already rhyming picture books with Bloomsbury. So I think it kind of seemed like that was going to be the format it was going to be in, really. I've only ever written, I think there's quite a few to come, so I think it's about 8 in total with Bloomsbury that are all rhyming, and although I do write text in prose, but that seems to be what they kind of like from me, really. So so it was the sort of obvious choice, really. But I have got some things I can show you, because I was thinking, I haven't really, like the illustrators have got loads of really lovely visual things they can show you, haven't they? It's a bit
we were fascinated. We'd love to see what you've got to show us, but we were fascinated when we talked to Sarah that she just got a text document, because it's really difficult to imagine this story, which is so brought to life for us by her illustrations, as ever just being text. So sorry, I'm in the shop. I'll let you carry on.
I've got mine on silent. Yeah. Shall I carry on?
Yes. So can you answer Tracy's questionnaire? Should we do in the background?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you look at Sarah's. I haven't looked at Sarah's interview with you yet, or chat really, I should say. It's not really an interview, is it? So I'm really looking forward to looking at that. But I was lucky enough to do an event with Sarah last year, just the end. No, wouldn't have been last year, would it? But the year before, the end of the year before. And she brought loads of photos and things like that for her early process. And she must have shared with you, but she actually built a town. Did she show you that?
Yeah, she did. It never occurred to me that you could do that if you were an illustrator. So
I was absolutely blown away when I saw what she'd done, because she wanted to make sure that all the different perspectives, that it would always look true to how it should be from every different kind of angle and perspective. It was absolutely amazing that she did that. So I mean, I know the process for illustrators is kind of far more visual, but that doesn't mean that as writers we're not thinking about that, thinking about that process, that journey that the illustrator will go on. So I mean, whenever I write a text, I'm always mindful that I don't want, obviously I want an illustrator to want to work on it firstly. So there needs to be something there for an illustrator to work with. And when you later on with a story, once you get into thinking about spread breaks and things like that, you really want to make sure that there's something for an illustrator on every spread. But it'll never be how you imagine it. They'll always, because they always bring so much more to it, and obviously they bring all their own stories into it as well. So it'll never be as you imagine it, but you just want to make sure that you kind of give them something to work with. And of course they will take the most kind of base ingredients and spin them into kind of gold and precious metals, really, is what they do.
Oh, that's very pretty. So what does your process look like then? So you mentioned that you have something to show us or something to share with us there. How does
I've done a few bits, so basically, I mean, I'd say my process has got quite sort of refined, I guess, over the years. So I mean, when I actually found my notebook for my very first book, which you can see is just like really, I don't know if you can see it, it's very sort of just notes, scrappy, there's no structure, there's no spread breaks. So that was kind of how I was kind of writing in the beginning. But by the time I got to The Girl and the Dinosaur, which was Stony Bones, as it was then.
I love that.
Normally I wouldn't have shown this, but my daughter, I gave my daughter, it might have been a mistake, the passwords and everything for my Instagram. She could put photos and things on my Instagram, and anyway, she put these she said, I'm going to put these early sort of sketches and outlines and things on, and I thought she would kind of take strategically shot pictures of bits that would make me look kind of clever and wouldn't show all my spelling mistakes and everything, but no, she just did the whole lot, warts and alls, zoomed in on the worst bit. But anyway, so this is, I don't know if it will show. So Stony Bones, as it was then, would have started with a spidergram like this.
Oh wow.
Just a really simple, like children would do in school, really. And in the middle it says Stony Bones because that's what it was called then. But there is a tiny little bit, I guess there's a little bit up here where already I've got the name Marianne, because obviously it's inspired by Mary Anning. And there's so the early rhyme would have been, there's a girl who hunts for fossils and her name is Marianne. You'll always find her hunting in the cliffs and on the sand, looking for shark's teeth and dinosaur bones, releasing beasties from ancient homes. So it's just a very early stages of what would kind of turn into the rhyme for the book. And lots of ideas that didn't happen. And then a bit later on, I do this with all my picture books now. Although I didn't do this in the beginning. In the beginning, I would just like write. I mean, the Mammoth one is kind of pages and pages and pages of just rhyme, no structure to it at all. But by the time I got to Stony Bones, so I would always do something like this. If I show you the first, so generally picture books are in 12 spreads, as I'm sure you've noticed, and the illustrators will tell you. But I'm quite lucky with Bloomsbury because they normally give me a few extra, but they kind of start off as 12, and then usually what happens is there's just too much text for 12 spreads, so they end up being kind of 14 spreads with a little extra one page at the end. So I do something like that. So there's 6. I don't know if you can see on the camera, I'm peeking around. There's 6 boxes there, and then another 6 on the other side, so 12 boxes. And in there is kind of what's going to happen in each spread. And at that point, that's when I'm really thinking, I need to make sure there's something visually happening in each spread. There's no good just having a whole spread of dialogue, because that's just useless for the illustrator. There's nothing for them to work with there. So yeah, it starts to take shape as a story then, and sometimes I do little pictures as well, but there aren't any in this one. My pictures are absolutely ridiculously bad. I always say when I go to schools, they're like stick men, but not in a good Axel Scheffler kind of way. They're literally stick men. Yeah, and then it gets into, let's see. So then I'll write like a rough draft. I'm probably talking far too much. I can't really show you. I'm going to show you something from my notebook now, but I don't want to show you the title, because I'll get in trouble if I show you the title, because I think this one's going to be made. But so then it'll get like a rough draft again, but it's in spreads by this point, because I've already marked out the spreads. And I usually write it out again a little bit neater. My writing, as you can see, is absolutely atrocious. So it's looking a little bit neater, and then it'll go onto the computer, and then I'll start checking for scansion then, and I'll print it out, and there'll be another draft, and then it'll go back onto the computer, and then it will go to either my agent or an editor, depending on if it's kind of speculative, then it will go to my agent. If it's commissioned already, then it will go to an editor, and then it will come back again. And usually get it back with notes from the editor. So, like they'll put notes on the side and stuff. And I normally print that out, because I quite like to have it physically. Yeah. And then it'll go back and forth. And then eventually it will get to when we've got it as good as we can get it, and it'll still change, then it'll get to the illustrator.
It's so interesting. What I'm really interested with well, we use the example of Dinosaur, because obviously that's the one we're talking about. Was there almost like a hook line? What was your way into it with the language? Was there a coupling or a phrase that? It's
going to sound really. It's just going to sound so pretentious when I say this, but sometimes I have it's not. I mean, I don't know if I can say it, because it will sound just so pretentious. But sometimes when I'm writing, if I want to get into a certain mood, you've got to find the voice for the book. And you've got to do that in a picture book, just like you would with a novel, with anything. You've got to find the voice. And sometimes you might be writing in first person, it might be a child's voice. And even then it's going to be different depending on whatever character you're writing. But for this book, I always knew it was going to be a third person narrative, but I still had to get into that voice of that narrator. So that narrator isn't me, and my voice is going to change in the different text that I write. So I just kind of, when I was writing this, it didn't really end up being like that in the end, but I had this kind of, Dylan Thomas, Under Milk Wood. I just had this, it was a poem that I loved as a child, and I just had this kind of, all that wonderful imagery of the little town and all the things going on behind the closed doors, and and all the characters living their own lives, and the sort of portholes into them. And that was so that was how I sort of pictured this town, really. And that was the mood I kind of took into writing it. I don't think you can't see it in there. I wouldn't say, my writing is anything like Dylan Thomas's writing, but it was just got me into that mindset. If that makes just makes me sound horribly pretentious, doesn't it?
It doesn't. We love a good literary reference here. We're all book nerds. Yeah, it's just really, I just love. I mean, I've read this a lot, Holly, and particularly lately.
I hope it hasn't been too painful.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm quite lucky, actually. My 2-year-old's got quite good taste when it comes to books. So,
That's fortunate.
I'm not having to read stuff I suffering through. He calls your character Marianne, actually. So
Aww.
Slightly different in our house. It's
Lovely.
Marianne. But it's that lovely thing about the air being thick with dreams. Is that the the air is thick.
Yeah, the air is thick with dreams. Yeah,
I love that. There's so many little phrases like that, but it's so evocative. It's lovely.
I do try and obviously I try and write some. I am quite mindful, like I've got teenagers now, but obviously we used to read a lot of books to our three. We had 3 children, and somehow we got in the habit, I don't know how, but quite early on we got into this habit of 2 bedtime stories each, as opposed to, and it would be each. So they would all, because they couldn't agree, even in that, they still can't agree now as teenagers, they couldn't agree even in those days. So it ended up being this 6-story marathon every evening. So I read a lot of picture books. And yeah, there were some that were an absolute dream to read, and you could read them time and time again. But there were others that, well, let's just say I read one, I don't want to upset anybody, but I read one called Potty Potty Wee Wee for about a year, which by the end of it I could have cheerfully burned it, so yeah, that's
not necessarily an indictment of a specific book, is it? It's just your experience as a parent of just being downtrodden.
No, I'm not. I mean, I'm sure that book was perfectly lovely, but when you'd read it every night for a year, to be honest, it could have been Dylan Thomas, and I probably would have wanted to burn it. But yeah, so I am quite mindful. I do think I am thinking of parents when I write stories, and thinking of some poor parent, because you always hope, don't you, that your book's going to be the one that children are going to want read to them again and again. Maybe not every night for a year, but repeatedly at least. So you want to give the parents something to work with, really. And I do think with a picture book, I've said this before, I also, before I got into writing picture books, I used to write plays. I'd had a couple of I'd written some one-act plays, and I wrote a radio play, and I always think picture books are as close as you get to writing for theatre, really, in an actual book, because really what you're writing is something for an adult to kind of perform to a child, if you like, because children don't read. Generally, picture books are read to children as opposed to children reading them themselves. Obviously older children do read them themselves. So yeah, I'm kind of thinking, well, what I'm writing really is a performance for a parent, and I want to give the parent something to work with and something that they're not going to hate. But I'm not saying I always achieve that, but it is in my mind when I'm writing.
That's so interesting, Hollie, because you're absolutely right. And as you were talking now, I was thinking of I think it was Michael Rosen a couple of years ago. Oh no, I'm mistaken. It was Quentin Blake. He was saying that there's absolutely no reason why in children's books the language shouldn't at least be creative and expressive and almost a little bit advanced, because well, I suppose his argument is children's comprehension levels are way above their reading comprehension
exactly
levels. Yeah. Or if you're but also, as you say, it's as much as an experience for a parent. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think, yeah, and I mean, I do think as well, children, obviously, as children progress with their reading, once they actually learn to read, and generally they're still enjoying picture books at the time that they're learning to read, they're learning to kind of do things like pick up on, they might not understand one word in particular, but they're taught to look at the whole sentence, aren't they, to try and kind of find, and they're encouraged to guess, well, what might that word mean, when it's positioned amongst all of those other words. So I think it's something that one comes naturally to us as readers. I mean, I still encounter words that I don't know what they mean as an adult, and I have to sort of think, oh, okay, what roughly that probably means. I might look it up later, but in the moment I'm just going to think roughly, what does that mean? So yeah, I think I think we perhaps underestimate children a little bit if we don't think that they're capable of that, because obviously they're doing that all the time in their day-to-day lives. When you're 3 or 4 years old, you're encountering words you don't know all the time, aren't you, in your everyday life. So it's a skill that they're used to, and I think there can be something in the language that hints at the meaning, even if the meaning is not immediately obvious.
And what about the rhythm of the language, particularly in a rhyming book like yours? Presumably that helps comprehension as well.
I think so. I mean, it's tricky with it's always tricky with the rhythm, because, you know, particularly when you're writing rhyme. I mean, I try, even with my prose text, to have the rhythm there, even though it's not as kind of obvious as it is with the rhyme. But you know, rhyme can be quite unforgiving, and when you write something and you read it over and over and over and over again, it's very easy to make it work, to make it fit. So it's hard, really, to come up with something that will work for most people. And I wouldn't be presumptuous enough to say that any of my books would work for everybody, but I suppose you're aiming, you're thinking, oh, you want it to work for most people. And you work on, obviously, things like scansion, and, you know, I mean, I'll do things like, I'll go for a walk and I'll be working through rhymes in my head, and I'll be counting the syllables on my fingers, you know, as I'm walking along, and things like that, to try and get the rhythm. Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I tend to now, my texts have, in the beginning, they were a bit more mishmash, so there would have been, you know, more uneven number, the rhyme scheme would have changed throughout the text and things like that. Nowadays, I roughly work in like 7 syllables, so it'll be 7 syllables, 7 syllables, so 14 in each line, and then the rhyme comes. So the rhyme comes on the 14th syllable of the next line. So that's roughly what I'm kind of most of the time aiming for. But obviously it doesn't work for every text, because that creates a kind of slow, you know, a lot of people have said that the Girl and the Dinosaur is quite a kind of I won't say slow in terms of what happens, but it could be read in a very plodding, you know, so, and that's not right for every text. So I think it probably works for that text, but it wouldn't work for everything. That's quite a long-winded way of answering your question. I suppose it's like, what it shows is that we do think about it, because I think, obviously, when in picture books, like, we're really mindful that the illustrators were working for months on these books, and it's kind of you know, some illustrators might only be able to work on 2 books a year, for example, because it takes so long, and we can obviously write stories a lot quicker than that. But I think there is sometimes this perception that we just kind of, you know, knock out a story in an afternoon, and then that's it, that's our bit done. But there is a bit, I think, you know, one, we put a lot more effort into it than that, and 2, obviously, that, you know, there's always going to be room for improvement, and we're always going to have to work on things and work, you know, sometimes work hard with stuff. So yeah, I think it's yeah, I think really I'm sure, you know, everyone else is the same who's writing stories. We are putting a lot of, probably a bit more thought and effort into it, into perhaps some people sometimes think, maybe.
You can tell the ones where the thought has gone into it, and maybe the ones that have been knocked out a little bit more quickly.
Well, I hope so. Or maybe not. Maybe in a few years' time, I'll be banging them out, you know, one in the night.
This book feels like something of a kind of modern classic to me, at least. And it's not just because I've read it so much, but I think the story is timeless. It's extremely relatable to children. There's that kind of that magic in it, which is there literally, but also figuratively, I think. But we were talking a little bit before, Holly, about some other books that also kind of got that longevity to them. So
yeah,
what other books can you talk to us about that kind of stand the test of time?
I had to think about, I was thinking, oh, you know, what am I going to share with you? Because obviously, as I said, my children are all teenagers now. But I thought it'd be nice to share the books that they loved as young children. And really, these are the ones that have stayed in the house, because they're the ones that they absolutely will not charity shop, you know, whatever happens. And I think, you know, that's kind of quite a good test, really. If you've got an 18-year-old who still won't let you charity shop a book. So I'll show you a couple of them. So I had to show you these actually, because these I did say they don't like picture books anymore, but every Christmas Eve, even the one who turned 18 just after Christmas, we have to read these two. So we've got the obligatory The Night Before Christmas, which is not even an amazing edition, but it's just the one that we ended up with. And we've also got, it's not really Christmassy time for Christmas books, but we've also got the Raymond Briggs Father Christmas.
And it's the old Ladybird editions.
This is the one where he's really curmudgeonly. I guess you probably sell a lot of these. And we absolutely, and they love it. And we have this, we have the two of them every Christmas. And it ends with, and he's, yeah, blooming, a happy blooming Christmas to one and all. That's what we finish with. So those two will never leave the shelf. And hopefully I'll get to read those to my grandchildren. What if I'm lucky enough? Hopefully not too soon. So then, this is my favourite picture book of all time, and it is also was one of the children's favourites that I'll never get rid of because it's my favourite anyway, which is the Mousehole Cats. If you can see, if I put it close to the camera. This is an absolutely gorgeous book. So it's quite old now, but obviously it's still in print, and it still does quite well, I think. I'm guessing you probably stock this, do you?
Yeah. Not regularly, but because we rotate the stock, but we have had it in. Yes.
Yeah, so this is absolutely beautiful. So by Antonia, Barber and Nicola, Bayley, and there's so much to admire in this book because the language is just amazing. You can see as well, you'd never be, I don't think you, well, I mean, I might try my luck with longer text, but when you look at how much text is in this book for a picture book, it is just, you know, lots and lots of text. No way is that under the kind of typical 700 words that we're supposed to go with. And the illustrations are just absolutely beautiful. So the storm cat in the book, I find a picture here. So they're just absolutely stunning. And my children love this because they loved books even when they kind of, apart from Potty Potty Wee Wee, which was the youngest, she quite liked a funny book, but the older two were quite serious. They didn't really like kind of, obviously there's a big drive around, you know, funny books, and they're often the sort of, you know, neglected kind of poorer cousin. But my two eldest weren't really much into things like that. They liked things that were like long and, you know, thoughtful and thought-provoking. The younger one was much more into funny books. So yeah, this is just the perfect example of that, and I don't think any publisher would let you, you know, well, you'd have to be really, really successful, I think, to get away with this now, because I think most publishers would not be keen at all to bring out something like this. And even thinking about the language, you know, we were talking about the I'm trying to find an example where, so night fell and the little boat sailed back across a slackening sea. So you know, you would probably get quite a lot of opposition to having something like that in a picture book. And then a little bit further on the page, we've got something about cloud-racked. All day they had watched and waited, staring out into the cloud-racked sea, but they could see no sign of him. So that's the sort of thing that I think, you know, you can, clearly, my children are an example, you can have language like that in a book that children will love and adore. But there would be, I think there would be quite a lot of resistance from the industry.
I think that would depend partly on the publisher, actually, because I think from what I know of Bloomsbury, they are looking for, well, they are a commercial publisher, aren't they? They're very large, and they will be looking for books that can have wide success. But Walker, who did that, and that must be one of their first titles, because they haven't been going for as long as it seems like they have.
Yeah, I'm not sure when this was first published.
I think that they started in the 80s. And they, to this day, will publish things that the bigger publishers might have rejected. So if you really fancy it, I think that you might be able to find a publisher who will do it. And I'd like to see what you could do. Yeah,
well, thank you. No, this was 1990, actually. I've just checked it. Okay. So yeah, must, as you say, it must be quite early in their story.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fabulous book. I love it.
Yeah, no, thank you for showing us. I haven't seen it for a while, so thanks for reminding us.
And what else? And then I also got so my children love this as well. This edition is still available. This is
I love that. Yeah.
Old Possums, Practical Cats, and this is the Axel Scheffler edition, which we absolutely love. You can see how battered and bruised this book is. So this is another one, and we've all got our favourites in this. So yeah, I think this is lovely as well. And again, you know, you wouldn't automatically think to read these poems to young children, but they do. Mine absolutely love them, and I think probably a lot of young children would as well.
I read that to mine when they were very young, yes, and it worked because of the familiar illustrations, but I would not have sat down to read T.S. Eliot to them without Axel Scheffler.
yeah, I'm not saying I would either. But actually this one as well, when they were a little bit older, they loved the Iron Man, and we just had like a text version of it. There was no, or there might have been one or two kind of very small illustrations in it. But then I think this book came out a couple of years ago. So this was something, well, actually this was on my Christmas list. So this wasn't for the children. This was 100% for me. I absolutely adore this Chris Mould edition of the Iron Man, which I'm sure you've seen, but it's absolutely stunning. And I think he's got an Animal Farm one. I haven't seen it yet, but
I got the Animal Farm one.
Have you?
Oh. We know it's one that the Iron Man there is one that comes in and goes out quite regularly. I think Chris Mould is just a really interesting illustrator.
I love his work, absolutely.
It's a perfect marry of author and illustrator, I think.
Yeah. We met him once, funny enough. We took the children to this like pop-up festival thing, and there was some different authors and illustrators there. And because this was before I wrote, well, I might have been writing books, but I didn't have an agent or anything, I don't think. And Chris was doing this workshop, this kind of like monster making workshop, and the children all made kind of pen pots with him, and he was just so lovely with the children as well. And we came away with a few of his books, but I've been a huge fan of his ever since then, really. That's when I first kind of discovered his work. But yeah, I think he's an amazing illustrator, and as you say, author as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, there's great recommendations.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes a little refresh in terms of illustrator is what's required to place readers back into the book.
To draw new readers in as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's really interesting, Hollie. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Our books at lunchtime today. If there are any people who haven't yet discovered, we've been hand selling this for ages, and we came across one of our directors the other day. I came across him in the street, and he was clutching a copy, and he said, "You
Excellent.
Get this from my grandson." So word gets out and it gets around. But this is now in paperback, isn't it? In the shop.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I don't think you can get the hardbacks anymore. It's probably quite hard to get the hardback now as well, but so it came out in paperback last year, it's been it was an absolute joy to work on that book, and obviously an absolute honor to work with Sarah as well. I should have mentioned, I will just quickly mention before we finish, when I was writing the story, I kind of thought even then that it would be the perfect book, Sarah would be the perfect illustrator for it, which I have told her, because it sounds quite stalky actually, but I knew the book was for Bloomsbury, and she was working for Bloomsbury already, so it wasn't kind of completely impossible, but I just kind of, I don't know, I just went, even when I was writing it, I could just picture, it seemed to me that Sarah would be the perfect illustrator for it. And in fact, Bloomsbury did, luckily for me, I mean, I didn't say that to Bloomsbury because I would never be presumptuous enough to suggest an illustrator. But luckily for me, they thought exactly the same thing, and they took it straight to Sarah, and it only ever went to Sarah. And fortunately, she said yes. But I think, I knew she would be the perfect person for it, and she absolutely, I mean, it's just I think what she's done with that book is just amazing.
Well, it's a textbook first class collaboration, I think. It's just a really great marriage of text and images, and it's why we love the picture book. And I think yeah, we didn't ask you what you've got next, did we? Can you briefly tell us what you're working on? Sorry, we're wrapping up and then not.
Yeah, no, well, I've got lots more books with Bloomsbury, so I'm hoping there's going to be more books with Sarah. I think there will. I've always said that I desperately want to work with Sarah again, and Bloomsbury would like us to work together again. And Sarah said she will, but I'm not sure when it will happen because she has such a massive just such a massive waiting list, basically. Like, everyone wants to work with Sarah, and why wouldn't they? So hopefully at some point she'll get round to one of my texts on the waiting list. I'm not 100% sure which one it will be, but hopefully at some point when the time's right she'll get round to it. And in the meantime, I've got I don't know if it might be embargo, but I am going to be doing a book with a lovely new illustrator that I've not worked with before, so I won't say who it is because it's probably not my news to share, but I'm looking forward to that. And there's going to be lots more books coming, and then there's one that's quite different to my other books as well. So they're all rhyming, but there's one that's a bit more kind of I don't know, a bit more sort of lively, shall we say. So that might be somebody completely different. Lots of other stuff in the pipeline I can't talk about. And also I've done I wrote a chapter book, which hopefully might go somewhere, because I basically, without the usual run of kind of school visits, and I do work in prisons with Stratford Literary Festival as well. We run bedtime story writing workshops in prisons. But without those kind of things to distract me, I've done a lot of writing. So I can't just write, there's a limit to how many picture books I can write and that will sell. So I wrote a chapter book, and then I wrote a novel as well. So I'm kind of in the process of editing that as well. So yeah, for grown-ups, which is the first time I have written for grown-ups, but I've never attempted a novel for grown-ups before. So that I'm editing that at the moment, and we'll see. That'll be fun. I have to start completely again, because obviously my agent is a children's agent, and she doesn't represent authors for grown-ups. So yeah, I'll have to start. There'll be completely starting from scratch with looking for an agent and hopefully finding a publisher and all that. I'm optimistic enough. You've got to be optimistic in this game, haven't you?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, there's so much for us to keep an eye out for. You'll have to let us know when you get publication dates firmed up, so we can keep an eye out for
Yeah,
there's quite a backlog, really, and so they'll be coming out. I think there's probably enough for, oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, there's enough several years with Bloomsbury, so, and then other stuff that I can't really talk about yet as well. So yeah, I think that this won't be the last you see of me anyway. Let's hope it's a good thing.
That's great news.
Oh, thanks so much, Hollie. Have a great rest of World Book Day week.
Thank you.
And it now, World Book Day week month.
Yeah.
We'd be happy to keep talking about kids' books. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye.